My name is Pat East. I'm Executive Director of the Mill and also Managing Partner of Flywheel Fund. We'll do quick one or two sentence introductions from each of the panelists. They'll introduce themselves, and then we'll run right into questions after that. Why don't we start at the end with Russ?
I'm Russ Mumper, Vice President for Research at Indiana University. I'm in my third month.
David Watkins, Senior Vice President of Entrepreneurship at the IEDC, oversee our small business entrepreneurship and innovation programs.
I'm Courtney Zaugg. I'm a new partner at Next Studios, but also have an economic development consulting practice called Plaka, and I support veteran and military spouse entrepreneurs as well.
I'm Jake Teshka, State Representative for House District 7, which is up in the northern part of the state, St. Joe County, South Bend area.
Scott Fadness, I'm ashamed to admit that until Hollowell texted me, I was actually sitting on a different stage waiting for the panel to start, and I was in the wrong room. I think I would have done all right, but I'm glad I'm here.
Awesome. I'm glad you could join us today, Scott. Thank you. I have a quick anecdote about each of those panelists. I know all of them pretty well, except for Jake. I'm starting to get to know him a little bit better. So, Russ Mumper. Well, we have a bunch of entrepreneurs on the panel. We have a bunch of we have a state legislator. We have a local, a municipality leader. We have some economic development folks. So I think we have a really, really good panel. Let me tell a quick anecdote about each of them. So, Dr. Mumper is brand new VP of Research at IU. I'm super excited about all the stuff that IU is doing. They have a really great new administration that's very pro-entrepreneurship. To his credit, quite literally on his second day, he came to a house full of entrepreneurs and other local community leaders in Bloomington to get to know the community. So kudos to him for that. Mr. Watkins, literally every time I walk into a room, a networking event, he makes a beeline straight for me. I appreciate his friendship and love that he's so supportive. Courtney is always down to come to Bloomington, is always really supportive of veterans in particular, so I appreciate that passion. Representative Teshka, we've recently expanded into South Bend, so the mill and flywheel is in Bloomington, but we do work all around the state. South Bend is easily the most active angel investor network outside of Indianapolis and Bloomington, so super excited about that. And Mr. Fadness, the fingerprints of launch fishers and all the stuff they do up there, particularly the K-12 programming, is all fingerprinted on Bloomington and the mill, so I appreciate all the pay it forward stuff he's done over the years for us and our community. All right, with that, let me dive right into questions. So the first one is for Courtney. So 3 of 4 Hoosiers live outside Indianapolis or one of the big 3 universities, cities, so the R1 institutions, IU, Notre Dame, Purdue. How can Indiana better support regions that lack large populations or universities?
Thank you. I have an anecdote about you, too.
A good one?
I swear, it's good. Years ago, so if you don't know Pat, you should know him. He is one of the most brilliant and frankly kindest people in the state and doing great work. And I remember asking him when we were talking about rural entrepreneurship, I said, what did you do? Where did you go to find the resources? And you're like, I drove to these, dense population centers. And so this question in particular resonates well because I think people still will go to the mill and they'll still go to Launch Fishers and the IoT Center, but now it's going out into the community. And so the answer is, what can Indiana do better? It's still go to where they are. And I think great work is already being done. Connect IND, now that you have a digital front door, right, for people to say, okay, I want to get into the ecosystem, I'm not really sure what to do, let me check this out. The mill now, you have your coding academy going into rural communities. I think that's also funded partly by state dollars, where you're going to them and giving them access. The IoT lab is, I can't see with the lights, but he's here somewhere. The IoT lab, going around the state and showcasing the opportunities with Internet of Things environment, that's all good stuff. So the entrepreneur in me, though, says, we need more and faster. And part of that means also the infrastructure with broadband. great work has been done. It continues to be done. Things are getting funded, but that also needs to be amplified. And I think the last piece would be in these communities that I would say especially are rural, meeting them where they feel comfortable taking risks will be really important. And many cases, that means the ag community. They will, likely, and from my experience working in rural communities, are uncomfortable with taking a risk on, how do you invest in software as a service company, right? But they surely will jump in and say, we understand the intersection between ag and tech. We're going to take a risk and pilot something there. And I think the state is still doing good work, and everyone in this room is doing good work. But I think there could be more done in piloting some of those projects at this intersection of where they feel comfortable to take those risks.
I have a follow-up question to that, and this is for Courtney or anybody on the panel. So in terms of meeting folks where they are, one thing that's great about technology, obviously, is that it shortens the distance between these dense areas and these rural areas. A lot of times, though, as entrepreneurs, we don't know what we don't know. So we may be able to access somebody or some advice online, but if we don't know to ask those questions, it doesn't matter if those resources exist. So how do we make sure that either people know about them or that we get more face-to-face time so that knuckleheads like me, when they start a business, somebody could say, no, do it like this instead?
Can I maybe take a stab at that,
Please, sir.
Pat? So I'm a little bit of a broken record with my team because way back in the pandemic, when we were dealing with just all of these startups and entrepreneurs and small businesses who needed to connect with resources, that was like the number one question I was asking myself, because it was what we were hearing from entrepreneurs. Well, where's the one place that I can find this and this and this and this? And I originally put it down on a budget that kind of made it into a parking lot of what we thought were good ideas, and called it a hub. Where was the hub that we could just find these three resources, let alone the hundreds of resources across the state? It took some work, but we've finally earlier this year launched what I hope is at least a additive resource for the ecosystem in Connect IND. And what it turns out is, like, I was really low barring it when I said, can we get these three resources in one spot? Because now we have over 3,000 resources in one spot. Entrepreneurs can certainly access the resources that are in their backyard, but perhaps more importantly, they can also access the resources in other parts of the state that would be available for them had they known that kind of resource was there. This launched in June, and we're obviously iterating on a near constant basis, but I think helping entrepreneurs know what they don't know or learn about the resources that they don't know are out there is one of the central theses for launching Connect IND.
Awesome, great answer, good resource. Mr. Fadness, if you could narrow it down to a single action or initiative, what's been the key to transforming Fishers into a vibrant entrepreneurial city?
Well, certainly launch Fisher's IoT Lab, all of those things were great milestones, but I think it was striking the right balance between allowing entrepreneurs to lead a policy initiative and providing them the resources while still covering off on the traditional checks and balances that government has to have. There's always this natural tension that occurs between the entrepreneur and the idea, and then policy folks and politics and the government bureaucracy trying to grab a hold of that and quote unquote add value to it. And so you just have to constantly be checking your ego at the door and trying to understand what your role is versus the entrepreneur. And honestly, I think if there was a single thing that I think we got right throughout that transformation was that we struck the right balance of allowing the entrepreneur to lead a policy initiative while providing them the resources, but still having the reasonable amount of accountability that allows taxpayers or the government to feel comfortable with what's happening. Too many times these ideas die or they blow up because that tone or that balance doesn't get struck correctly, and they ultimately fail.
A follow-up question to that. So for municipal leaders who want to do more entrepreneurship and take that advice of, okay, let's give a little bit more room for these entrepreneurs to lead a policy initiative, how do they get comfortable with allowing somebody who is stereotypically hey, I'm going to do it my own way. I don't want to follow your rules. In fact, if you tell me to do it this way, I may do it this other way. How do you get comfortable with elected officials taking that first step?
Well, I never had any of those conversations, right, Wexler? We never had any of those discussions at any point. You know, elected officials are like corporate employees. They're risk averse, right? They don't get big wins by taking big risks. Entrepreneurs are comfortable in that environment. And so you have to figure out a common language. You have to figure out what incentivizes the community to be a part of that. There's a lot of conversations about why. There's a lot about creating the overall environment, and I think that was something that we did early on. We talked about why this was an ecosystem. We weren't necessarily picking one entrepreneur or another entrepreneur, but rather on the collective, if there's entrepreneurial activity happening in your ecosystem, that's a net positive for your community. And so we talked at the macro level, because the minute you get down in the micro level where you start talking about, well, tell me about this company. Are they going to make it? I don't know. Tell me about this entrepreneur. Is this a good entrepreneur? I don't know. But I know if we have a whole bunch of them doing entrepreneurial activities in our community, we're better off. And so we really try to stay at that macro level and never get down into the picking winners and losers conversation.
So what I kind of heard there, the theme or the through line was lots of communication, lots of common language, lots of back and forth to make sure that government and entrepreneur were on the same page, not just, hey, here's a policy initiative I want you to lead, great, you want to lead it, and then kind of let everybody go. It's a lot of back and forth and a lot of working together, which is probably pretty mundane advice, and I don't think enough of us follow that. Dr. Mumper, Dr. Mumper, with the insight that a small percentage of faculty drive the majority of invention disclosures, how can universities motivate a broader range of faculty to innovate and disclose?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I've had the pleasure of working at or for 5 Carnegie R1s, all flagships in 5 different states. And so they were all very expansive research organizations, all doing startup economic development efforts. But one common observation is that if they have 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 faculty, the great majority of the activity, invention disclosures, startup companies, patents, licensing, is contributed from less than 100 of the faculty. And that's true for, in my whole experience the last 25 years. And almost all of that activity for those 100 or less faculty come from activities that are kind of in the faculty members' free time. You know, so why is that? That's because the traditional research-intensive university has developed a way of recruiting, evaluating, promoting faculty that really heavily aligns with teaching, research, and service. And so any entrepreneurial activities tend to be outside of that rigid defined system. I think there's great opportunity to extend that service component, the tripartite mission, teaching, research, and service, to include being an entrepreneur, economic development. That's certainly true for public universities, and I think a great policy consideration, I've been a big advocate, is that as state-funded research universities are engaged in their mission, that there's an expectation that faculty are, certainly at a minimum, their entrepreneurial activities are valued and perhaps even expected. And for those that, and I'm a true believer that universities can be a part of the engine of economic development, it could really be unleashed from my perspective if we integrate it into the local, regional, and state ambition and goals to a more fuller extent.
You know, this panel is about how to unleash entrepreneurship and innovation on a statewide level, and policy seems to be one way where we can do that kind of with a big, broad brushstroke. And so, Russ, maybe could you talk a little bit more about maybe what a policy consideration might look like, either for public institutions or maybe IU specifically? It sounds like you can't just say, okay, we want to base and award tenure off of these things. It has to be policy driven in order to kind of unleash some of this IP and disclosures that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think universities should be at the table, but there's multiple partners. I've seen great models of this kind of this public-private partnership between universities, industry, whether they're small companies, large companies, and even state and the state agencies, kind of these tripartite partnerships that align common goals. One that I'm very familiar with, have been fond of, is the high-tech corridor in Florida, where they have a state-funded agency that's working with the 3R1s, South Florida Central and University of Florida in an 18-county region. And the state agency will match, to a certain extent, dollar-for-dollar funding from companies that want to do research in areas that are important to the 18 counties, to both spur innovation, but companies coming to those 18 county regions, and then also involving students in those projects, with the idea then is as students are engaged in those projects, they become part of the future talent and workforce for that ecosystem that's being created. So that's a great, I think, a strategy that involves multiple partners, but I think when done right, it's really a compelling model in my view.
Thank you. Representative Teshka, thank you for driving down from South Bend this morning. We appreciate your time and talent here. Your question, Indiana's top 5 for best places to start a business. Yes, statistically, we're in the bottom 5 for actually starting businesses. Legislatively, how do we look at what other states who are ahead of us are doing to try to catch up?
Well, thank you. And I think, that's one of the things that I came down to the State House to kind of pursue and to look at. And that's born out of the fact that, I neighbor Elkhart County, where I think there's a new business born at a rate higher than, babies are born, right? I mean, this is a very entrepreneurial area. We've got the Idea Center out in Notre Dame. We've got Startup Moxie. We've got all of this great entrepreneurial infrastructure in that north central part of the state. And so one of the things that I started right away was looking around at other states and what they have been doing to kind of, as you said, unleash kind of the power of entrepreneurs. And some of this is a cultural thing, and I think while we can't legislate culture, we can use our positions to influence the culture. And by culture, I mean creating a culture of entrepreneurship in the state. And so looking around, I've introduced bills that I've kind of picked from other states, including regulatory sandbox bill, including some occupational regulation reforms that we passed last year, as well as the right to start bill, which I know that we have talked about. And right to start is really kind of a broad concept. It brings in, looking at how healthcare issues affect small businesses and entrepreneurs, and how taxing and all of those sorts of things. One of the things that we focused on in the bill that we introduced last year, we didn't quite get it done, but that's the legislative process, so we'll come back and take another swing, but is that we're going to look at possibly dedicating 5% of our economic development spending, 5% of our workforce development spending, and 5% of government contracts to those businesses that are considered startups. That would be 5 years or less in business. Recognizing that, all of the work that IEDC and others have done in getting some of these really large employers. My district's the beneficiary of a $3.5 billion GM plant, and certainly we're grateful for that. But we also know that most net new job creation happens by folks who are in those 5 years or less in their journey as being a business.
So right to start seems pretty important in terms of creating those net new jobs. You're right, a vast majority of net new jobs come from companies five or less. So what are the things preventing right to start legislation from getting passed in Indiana? Well,
look, I think, part of it is just the legislative process, right? When you introduce a new idea, when we start talking about things and you work a bill through committee, you really have to sell this and really get folks used to the concept and those sorts of things. As a part-time citizen legislature, which I love, I use part-time in air quotes. I've seen some of my colleagues out here. They can tell you that part-time is very much a loose term. But the session goes really quickly. And so, and there's a lot of bills that are introduced. I think we had upwards of, 1,300 bills introduced this last session. So it's really just a matter of getting folks used to those concepts. And so I'm confident that when we come back for this, which will likely be next year since it'll be a budget year, maybe not, this is a policy thing, but But I'm confident that the more swings we take at it, the more comfortable folks get with it.
Awesome. That's good news. Mr. Watkins, I think everybody's familiar with the READY program. How does the READY program tie into the broader entrepreneurial vision for Indiana, especially with the recent funding for version 2.0?
Yeah, well, massive thanks and kudos to the General Assembly for putting together a really compelling package to invest in quality of life. So it's integrated from the very top. I think if you've heard someone from the IEDC in the last couple of years, you're well aware of our 5E strategy. Entrepreneurship is one, and that's what my team focuses on. But the environment, and specifically the built environment, is another. And those go hand in hand, I think, in a number of ways, Pat. The first is when we're talking about entrepreneurs starting businesses, coming to Indiana to start a business or to grow a business, we're really talking about individuals. Quality of life, quality of place matters. And it's not a number that we throw some tax credits at from an entrepreneurial point of view. It's a person, a small team of people who are looking at a place to live and to grow their business. And so READY making these types of investments in quality of life and quality of place is really important from that point of view. I think the second, and this maybe gets to some of the impact of entrepreneurship in rural areas of the state, we actually have a higher percentage of entrepreneurs in rural parts of the state than we do in our urban areas, which shouldn't surprise anybody given kind of the way that the economic clustering works throughout the state. But these investments that are being made through READY, not just those kind of specifically dedicated towards entrepreneurship, but even the mixed-use facilities that'll have some housing and some retail. We had a IEDC board meeting in Richmond, and the mayor of Richmond was talking about one of the READY-funded projects that has all first-floor retail. Richmond wants entrepreneurs, small businesses to be part of that type of development. Why? Because they want people to live and locate and start their businesses in Richmond. And then the last area is actually really directly. And that is that READY funds have gone toward the build out and infrastructure of entrepreneurial hubs across the state. I was down in Edwardsville, Indiana, outside of New Albany a few weeks back at the ribbon cutting for Nova Park, which is a new innovation and technology park in southern Indiana that has a co-working space with a presence from the SBDC and the Root and Elevate Ventures. It has plans for a makerspace build out and just landed their first corporate tenant in Redwire Space, which is an Indiana startup that has gone through being acquired by another great innovative company, and now is setting up shop in this innovation park in southern Indiana. READY funds helped with the development of that site and the build out of the co-working space. So across the state, there's these examples where communities have come together, regions have come together, and through that prioritization process said, we think entrepreneurship and innovation is really important for our community, and we're going to put together a proposal to utilize READY funds to invest in an entrepreneurial space, a maker space, a shared kitchen, a co-working space, a hub for innovation, the Propeller Innovation Center in Columbus. I know, Pat, you were involved in with the mill. So there are a lot of examples, I think, of how communities can take advantage of the READY program in that way.
Let me pull on that thread a little bit. So entrepreneurship in the rural areas is super important. 3 out of 4 folks don't live in the 3 university cities or Indianapolis, so it affects a large swath of the population. Outside of READY, what are the ways that Indiana, either legislatively or culturally, can support those rural areas? Is it through entrepreneurship centers? Is it through other ways? How do we make sure that those folks don't, that they benefit from all the good work that is happening in some of the more denser areas?
Yeah, and I'll maybe take a first stab and then let my colleagues say. So I grew up in a rural area, a small town. Family was in agriculture. My grandfather started a car dealership 96 years ago. Small businesses in rural areas are the lifeblood of those communities. From our point of view at the IEDC, one of the best things that we can do is actually lift up and tell those stories of entrepreneurship. A, that it's happening in every community across the state. B, that it is wildly innovative. Amazing ideas and products and services coming out of places across the state that we may not think of, and we should, because they're really, really innovative. And then the last piece I would say is actually what Courtney mentioned, getting out there and having FaceTime. We have a team of over 100 folks across the entire state. By the end of January, we had met with an entrepreneur in all 92 counties, just from the beginning of the year to the end of January. And so I think it's important to get out and meet people where they are, like Courtney mentioned.
I'd also say, I think one of the great side benefits of the whole READY program is the increased cooperation in these regions, right? You've got this new ecosystem of regional partnerships that can serve as a liaison between those local entrepreneurs and their state government, or different resources and those sorts of things. And so that's one of the things that I've seen out of the South Bend Elkhart Regional Partnership. If there's an applicant for a READY grant, for instance, and they don't get it, at least they're connected now to a group of folks that can help them navigate the other resources.
I think the other part that frustrates me a little bit, and why I was so supportive of this organization from its creation, is that a lot of this discussion is centered on his job down at the State House. Don't be afraid to hold your local government accountable for doing a good job. So much of these policy decisions that directly impact the entrepreneur are happening on Main Street. Is your community headed in the right direction? Are they taking the appropriate risks? Is there dynamic things occurring in your municipality or in your region? I think too often people skip over that piece of it and they go right to some kind of macro level IEDC or state organization. And I'm not saying those don't have a big impact, they can and do, but it's your hometown. You know the players. Get engaged, get involved, and I think it can make a big difference if you get active. Pat, what you've done in Bloomington is nothing short of astounding. Wexler, what you did in Fishers. I could name these people who, if they didn't roll up their sleeves and engage their local government, this doesn't happen. And so I do think there's an important component of this to hold your own local elected officials accountable in regards to this.
I think the through line I'm seeing through some of these answers is, one, face-to-face time, right? Entrepreneurs don't know what they don't know, so they have to have somebody see what they're doing and point out to them maybe there's a different or better way, and lots of communication, again, from Mayor Fadness, and working with these entrepreneurs and working with these other officials, and just making sure we're all on the same page. It's mundane but important work. This question is for anybody on the panel. For Indiana to strengthen its position as a hub for tech and innovation in the Midwest, what are we doing that we should be doing more of? Who wants to take a first stab?
To echo what I think I said in the beginning, more, faster regarding the digital adoption. Again, going, both in urban areas and suburban areas, but also in rural areas, it's just critical. So we talk about face-to-face, but I think face-to-face also means it can be virtual too, right? Excuse me. So making sure that it's easy for anyone in the state to be able to access whatever type of information they need at that time. Let's do that more, let's do that faster. And I think, ITIA has done a great job advocating for those things. It's been successful doing that, and I look forward to seeing that move forward too.
I'd say, another thing is recognizing that, this is not kind of a siloed issue, right? So for instance, this last session, we took a swing at having DOE come back and look at our education standards more often. And so I know on the last panel, there was a discussion about education and how much that plays a role in this. Right now, we're looking at those standards every 6 years. We all know that, government doesn't move at the speed of business, but 6 years is too long with all the emerging technologies that we have coming online that may impact whether it's, what kids need to know or how they need to learn it, all of those sorts of things. And so, we need to, I think, take a more broad look at this and see, all of the different tentacles that innovation technology, and where in those policy areas do they fit?
I think there's an opportunity, if you want to be bold in the state, to fully invest, full-heartedly invest in the institutions that have built Indiana. And by that I mean our ag industry, our life science industry, our manufacturing industry, along with our higher ed institutions, as they need to innovate and transform to meet the next generation of their industry. Coming alongside the entrepreneurs that are daring to be a part of that transformation, that are homegrown here in Indiana, is really an interesting concept to me. So, as all these mid-tier manufacturers start to transform, are they going to hire East Coast and West Coast companies or European companies to come in and do that? Or is there an opportunity to grow companies right here in Indiana that can kind of live off of the institutions that have built Indiana to what it is today? I think if we were to fund innovation and then fund the bridge to the entrepreneurs that are here, I think there's a real opportunity here in Indiana.
So what does that look like on a tactical level, funding that innovation to create that bridge to the entrepreneurs?
Well, I'll give you a great example. So I was up touring a steel mill a long time ago, and we were talking about how they were getting crushed by China, and they had all of these old kind of antiquated technologies that they were using that were driving inefficiencies in their organization. If there was an opportunity, let's say, to create a program that said, I know we already have a semblance of this in the IEDC where you invest in manufacturers that want to modernize. But if we took that a step further and said, if you were to use one of the networks, one of the companies that are here in Indiana, one of the startup companies, to help in that transformation, perhaps there's a sweetener on the deal that says, hey, you get even more capital to be invested in that. Same with pharmaceutical manufacturing. There are companies on the East Coast and West Coast that are dying under the expense of that type of work. Well, if there's startup companies here and we have a network, can we subsidize the cost of like small batch production in life sciences here to try to create, again, that small and medium-sized company and that entrepreneurial effort that's building on the legacy industries that call Indiana home today?
I love those ideas, and for any legislators in the room, I think Mayor Fadness would love to continue to talk more about that, see how we might be able to
Careful
make
what you
that
wish for on
happen.
that one, yeah.
All right, that last question was about what should we double down on? What are we doing? What are we currently doing that we should do more of? So this one's kind of hitting it from the opposite perspective of how do we unleash more entrepreneurship here? To foster more collaboration between the private sector, academia, and government, what should we be doing that we're not currently doing? Who wants to take a first stab, Russ?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I go back to that concept about kind of the public-private partnership with the public research universities or any universities that's doing innovation and provides a talent and workforce, working with industry, working in concert with the state government to really align mission and common goals. And I think the one example I gave is just one example of models around the country that I guess I've appreciated for, I guess, the alignment of goals and common goals and mission for the public good. And I think there's a lot of benefit in that when you get it right.
Anybody else?
I would just say having more entrepreneurs, business owners at the table, right? And in rooms where decisions are being made about, policies at universities and even in our K-12. And I think that there's some legislators that have taken that to heart. We this last session, I do remember quite a few different areas where we added, there's some committee being formed, right? And we say, well, there's got to be somebody representing business or entrepreneurship or something like that at the table, right? So that we're not kind of getting too heady on all of this stuff, and we have folks with real world experience at the table.
Awesome. One of the areas where I see Indiana maybe could double down on that it's been doing well and just could do more of is attracting more venture capital here, and also kind of surfacing a lot of the angel investment money that exists in the state, but is going to small businesses or is going into the stock market or real estate. Maybe it could go into startups. Could maybe somebody talk a little bit about how do we attract more capital to the state to be able to fund some of these companies?
Well, I'll maybe take a stab at it, Pat, actually. So, middle of last year, the state of Indiana was one of the first dozen or so states approved for the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which allowed us to access up to $100 million in capital from the federal government in order to fund credit for small businesses. We've already earmarked over 70 million of that for venture capital to augment what we're already doing with state funds, and have begun deploying that to the tune of about $16 million in commitments already, less than or just about now a year in on that program. And perhaps really exciting for us too, we've earmarked a portion of that funding to look at how the state can better support access to capital at the debt side, which for a high percentage of the entrepreneurs in the state and small businesses is really where they start their capital journey, is accessing debt, whether that be from a lender or from some other type of micro lender or a mission-based lender throughout the state. Revolving loan fund, a lot of local communities, cities, counties have a revolving loan fund that entrepreneurs can access as long as they know that it's there and available and are connected to those resources. I think the second area where we obviously spend a lot of time is how do we attract outside capital to the state and help build up the capital ecosystem in the state. And certainly ITIA has been part of that journey from 2018, where the state had about $250 million in venture capital that came into investment deals here, less than 100 deals, to last year, where we had our second year over $1 billion and an all-time high number of deals, 225 in the state. I think that's a combination of our direct investment strategy. I think that's a big part of that too is the venture capital investment tax credit, which the legislature not only increased the cap on an annual basis. Last year we did $18.5 million in VCI tax credits. In previous years, we probably would have been done giving out those tax credits in August. We were able to still give out those tax credits in December. And raising the cap was important, but also making it transferable. I can't tell you how many conversations I have with out-of-state VCs that's a real sweetener when they learn that they could make an investment and receive that tax credit and be able to actually see a monetary value from that credit by selling it to somebody who wants to be able to lower their Indiana tax liability. And then the last piece is the Next Level Fund, $250 million fund that we're actively looking at how we can make sure to make that a $500 million fund as it was originally intended, but already taking that idea and saying we understand now that we have startups in Indiana that can attract capital from all over the world. How can we as the state play a role in investing in those venture funds that are looking at making investments in Indiana startups and returning that capital, both what we already have here in the state, helping that grow, but also getting others to come here and explore Indiana startups. We have a compelling case, especially in an environment where venture capital may be a little drier in the next year or so. The fact that you can come as an investor or a VC and your capital can go so much further here, being able to offer a fund of funds strategy for economic development certainly puts us in a strong position to be able to attract dollars here for our entrepreneurs and our startups.
I'm going to actually double down on what both of you said earlier, and that is, I think the best attraction strategy is actually encouraging our existing population to pull them out and say, yes, you can be an angel investor, right? So from putting my economic development hat on, the best way to attract talent in business is actually investing in a business retention expansion program. So you invest in your existing communities, your existing people, and the infrastructure here, and that will bring additional attraction of capital and talent in business.
Let me pull on one thread. We have just a couple minutes left. Let me pull on one thread. So lots of big investments from the state in terms of VCI tax credits, expanding that, increasing the percentages, increasing the total dollar amount. That was a real problem once we got to November, December, right? Literally investors would stop making investments to wait till January, which is if you're running out of cash is a pretty big problem. SSBCI, the fund of funds, all those are really great. Let me ask maybe a little bit more pointed question. So this is for David. In the startup genome survey that came out late last year or middle of last year, it identified one area for Indiana where we were deficient at, which is kind of right before the Series A round. We're just not attracting enough capital. Not enough is going in there. So my question is, do we just need to give these programs more time? Are there other things, right? Do we need to give them more time to actually work? Do we need to do other things to get the pre-Series A rounds up? Is it okay because our cost of living is lower? I don't know what's your thought on that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There were a couple, university tech commercialization was another thing in the Startup Genome Report that we're particularly interested in. So I think it's a twofold, and I do think there's a time component. So all-time record year for the direct investment of state dollars in Indiana startups was last year. And we obviously do that through our partners, our friends at Elevate Ventures. 19 million, that was quite a delta from previous years. Typically we were around the maybe 12 to 13 at a high water mark invested. So I do think there's a time component, whereas we see this journey of these companies mature, we'll start to see a greater and greater return on the back end for that. The other thing that we've invested pretty significantly in too is on the non-dilutive capital side as well. Understanding that not all capital is created equal for an entrepreneur, and non-dilutive is obviously a ideal scenario. Whether it's specific to a company that's trying to manufacture something. So we had some mentions of the manufacturing readiness grants, but we're actually deploying those for young companies as well, not just legacy manufacturers. We're deploying those for young, innovative companies that are looking to create something here in Indiana. But other things like the innovation voucher that allow the state to play a role in offsetting the cost. So again, not a grant for a business that's growing or innovating here in Indiana, but certainly a monetary value for some type of value-added service from one of our great universities like IU, to be able to do some of that research and development and that validation to again try to make at least the capital more efficient as they grow into that next stage or series that they need to raise.
Awesome. That's a great answer. One last one to wrap us up before we head out to lunch. This is kind of rapid fire. Try to get a call to action for our elected officials. We'll just go right down the row, starting with Mayor Fadness. What's the one policy or initiative, if you could just wave your magic wand to get it passed, what's the one policy or initiative that you believe could have the most significant positive impact on Indiana's entrepreneurial landscape?
I think a clear-eyed and candid evaluation of the Next Level Fund and its implementation, and identifying whether or not we need to change course to achieve the outcome it was originally created for.
Awesome. Great. Representative Teshka.
Well, from my perspective, obviously, I think that, continuing to go down this path of, as we talked about the right to start and those sorts of things of creating a culture of entrepreneurship from the state level and making sure our policies reflect that, reducing barriers to entry, and those sorts of things.
Awesome. Courtney.
Also right to start, both from the state perspective and at the local perspective.
David.
I think he was here, Don Wettrick, but as we think about how to increase the rate of entrepreneurship in the state of Indiana, certainly there's a now component to that, but there's also a future component to that. And the fact that close to 3,000 high school students went through Innovate Within as a pitch competition and had a entrepreneurial thought, I want to foster that for that next generation of entrepreneurs, 20, 30 years down the line.
Awesome. Dr. Mumper.
I've been a big fan of state initiatives where they leverage state dollars to match federal awards, small business, SBIR, STTR, as a non-dilutive way to maybe pre-Series A.
Awesome. Thank you so much, panelists. I appreciate your time and talent today.